Happy Sunday. Albert Einstein once said, "The ideals that have lighted my way, and time after time have given me new courage to face life cheerfully, have been kindness, beauty, and truth." We've discussed truth and its pull on us to keep our hearts on the right track. We've discussed kindness and its power to offer selfless joy. So of Einstein's ideals, only one's left: beauty. How do we relate beauty to a religious discussion, though? Well, I remember 20 years or so ago, my dad coming to visit me when I was living in New York City. One of my favorite places in New York City is St. John of the Divine Cathedral on the Upper West Side. And talk about a church you can socially distance in. The sanctuary is literally the size of a college football stadium, and there are multiple smaller sanctuaries and reliquaries and mortuaries branching off from the main sanctuary. It's huge. All the construction in it's modeled after classical Gothic architecture. Everything's made from colossal stones and finely worked stained glass and intricate carvings. Just adornments abound. I could and did sit in St. John often, reading the Book of Mormon or other scriptures and enjoying the sacred space. So here my dad was visiting me in New York City from Indianapolis. He'd driven out from Indianapolis. I'm taking him to see some sights, and I decided to take him to St. John of the Divine. It's one of my favorite sites. Dad has his own religious sensibilities that Western Christianity isn't a huge part of. I'm kind of speaking for him, but generally. But I was still pretty much a kid at that point, and I just kind of wanted to show off something I thought was cool. My enthusiasm proved less than infectious, though, because Dad wasn't impressed. His sentiment toward the building, as I heard him express it at the time, was that it was ostentatious and unnecessary. All the money and time poured into making this wonder in the name of God, that money could have been given to the poor. I wasn't necessarily reminded then, but I am now, of what Jesus said while being anointed at Bethany. A woman, Mary Magdalene in some retellings, anoints Jesus with expensive oils. The disciples cluck and they say, "What a waste! That oil could have been sold for a high price and the money given to the poor." And Jesus replies, "Why criticize this woman for doing such a good thing to me? You always have the poor, but you will not always have me." We're Americans, most of us anyhow. We're descended from Puritans. Puritanism still runs rampant throughout American culture. It really does. You might not realize it, but it does. Even if you don't really see its influence directly. Puritanism is why our movie rating system says that nipples are bad and oaths in vain are bad, but Power Rangers can kill somebody every week. Death, violence, that sort of thing, not so bad. That's PG-13. You get R-rated if you show a body. You get PG-13 rated if you chop a body in half. And that comes out of Puritanism. That comes out of those values. If you think of the Kirtland Temple, jumping from St. John of the Divine to a religious structure that fits, some sensibilities we know a little better, the Kirtland Temple reflects quite a lot of typical Puritan and early American church architecture. There's no stained glass. There's very nicely cut and placed right angles. There's a simple steeple on a rectangular building with a plainly shingled roof. Inside are only pews and a pulpit area. There's nothing fancy, nothing distracting. And that's another approach, right? So we've got St. John of the Divine. It's ornate and beautifully built up and just gorgeous, and there are right angles, but there's so many just curves and adornments and stained glass and everything. And then you've got the Kirtland Temple, really no stained glass, nice clean angles, white interior, clean. Was my dad right to criticize St. John of the Divine Cathedral then? Am I criticizing the Kirtland Temple now? On the latter, I can firmly say no, I'm not criticizing the Kirtland Temple. I actually deeply love the Kirtland Temple and those early Mormon temples and other less extravagant temples from the early period of the Restoration. And yet I also love St. John of the Divine. I love both because to me, both are beautiful and both are prayers. All right, we dove in a little far there with that last sentence. Let's back up for a second. And let's jump in a time again. Let's move in time again here. So here, in my timeline. So here I am, and I'm in a Buddhist temple this time. I don't remember how old I was when this happened, but late 20s, early 30s. And this particular temple was fairly ornate. There were big statues of the Buddha and flowers, and it wasn't as ornate as St. John of the Divine, not as clean cut as the Kirtland Temple. The same aesthetics wage battle in Buddhism than do in Christianity, to be honest. If you look at like a Zen structure, Zen Buddhists are known for their Apple stores, right? The Apple store is kind of based on these Zen aesthetics. They're just very clean and clear of all thought. There's not much bash boom wallop to them. But then you have the Vajrayana Buddhists, which is the Tibetan kind of Buddhism, is Vajrayana. And their spaces, you've probably seen some Tibetan Buddhist stuff, and it's all colors, lots of orange and red and explosions of color and various Buddhas and depictions of them and murals and mandalas and all these beautiful things, right? So those same aesthetic poles exist in other religions too. So this particular Buddhist temple I was in my story here, was a Pure Land temple. Pure Land is the world's most practiced form of Buddhism, though it's not well known in the West. And in this story, I'm praying with this congregation, except we're moving. That's a common form of prayer in Buddhist denominations, a walking prayer. You don't just pray with your words, though you can chant. Often there's chanting involved. But you pray with your feet. It's a moving prayer. The phenomena of a moving prayer exists in Christianity too. Probably at least a few of you have watched Monty Python and the Holy Grail. There's monks shuffling along at one point, kind of in the background, and on certain rhythmic beats of their chants, like Om Mono No Mo. Then they whack themselves in the head with boards. And that, it's spoofing, but there is that kind of walking monkly chant does exist within Christianity, and it's the same style of prayer as in the Buddhist walking chants. And then, of course, Christianity famously has labyrinths, like the labyrinth at Chartres, which is not a maze. Some people that just have a very vague passing knowledge of it think it's a maze that you have to find your way through, but it's not a proper labyrinth like that. It has one path that you go in, and then you just walk until you get to the center, and then you make your way back out. And the intention of that is that you don't run through it, that you walk slowly, and each step is a prayer as you're in the labyrinth. Because as you walk in contemplation of God, you're praying even if you have no words to go with it. You're taking the time to just walk in God, walk with God. Similarly, to me, building a temple seems like a prayer. We know of the lengths the early saints had to go to in order to build the Kirtland Temple. They donated time and resources and their blood, sweat, and tears to constructing it. So, plain Jane or not, the Kirtland Temple was those early saints' prayer. It was a call up to God and a chance to dwell with her. Another story from my past. I was around 12 or so. A group of we church youth had a chance to visit a Russian Orthodox church in a neighborhood a little over from ours. This church wasn't any kind of cathedral by any means. It was fairly small. As large as your kind of average, just little Hoosier church. But the inside dripped with iconography. They just had, it was just everywhere. There were these very medieval, like when you think of what iconography, and they had it. And I almost unwittingly walked like between an icon and the altar or something that I wasn't supposed to. They didn't get mad, but they were like, hey kid, don't go there. So it just meant so much to them, this aesthetic. It meant something deep and powerful to the congregation. And me, coming from a background firmly rooted in the plain Jane architecture of early 1800s American Christianity, that visit to that Russian Orthodox church was the first time I had experienced that type of sanctuary, that type of beauty. We stayed to observe this Russian Orthodox service, and I think he was a priest or whatever, officiate. He walked the aisle swinging one of those incense. That's not a decanter. Maybe it is. I can't remember the word off the top of my head. But it was on a chain, and he's swinging this incense. And then they were chanting in some Byzantine language, Russian or something. I'm actually not positive. And there was this heady combination of that smoke and this chanting, and the icons and all of that. And just took me somewhere else, which was what that presentation was meant to do. Honestly, it was not my favorite place that it took me. I had to excuse myself out to the restroom to try to kind of keep my Wendy's settled, because we'd had Wendy's right before. But it was definitely a place that it took me. A place steeped in a very rich beauty of its kind. If temples and churches or prayers in their own right, if walking through their aisles or grounds is praying, then what harm is the beauty in them? You will always have the poor among you, but you will not always have me, Christ said about the expenditure of the beautiful oil. Our literal verbal prayers can be plain Jane or austere and adorned. And neither approach necessarily trumps the other. You can offer a Byzantine chant or a Latin verse, or you can offer the simple words, I'm scared, I love you, please help me. Both ways of constructing a prayer we offer reach God's ears. Beauty in the way we construct our temples, our prayers, and our lives is in the eye of the beholder, right? Plain and simple has a beauty all its own, like the Kirtland Temple. Ornate and ostentatious has a beauty too, like St. John of the Divine Cathedral. At least once a week, I take a bit of a walking prayer around the temple here in Indianapolis at 116th and Spring Mill. I've done that for years now. We've kind of discussed before, I'm not allowed in that temple. I don't ever recommend. But I take my walk around the boundaries of the temple grounds, and then some, kind of wander out, and there's a couple little retention ponds that I kind of wander out past. I look to the beautiful windows of the temple and the ornate architecture, a rich mix of both plain Jane styles, because it's kind of based on those early Nauvoo and Kirtland temples to a small extent, and the classical beatific styles of European cathedrals, because it's also designed to be much more ornate. I look at that building and I see the beauty of it. Not in its construction necessarily, but what lies behind that construction, under that construction, inside that construction. which is the beauty of us coming together in prayer. The beauty of us trying to show ourselves how wonderful God can be. The beauty of "I love you" spoken to the one who so loved the world. Maybe this week, take the time to walk with beauty. Go somewhere beautiful. Temple grounds, a local park, riverside, wherever it is to you. Look at that beauty and remember the beauty inherent in God and her works. Don't question the value of the beauty or if it's a spoil of riches. Just bask in the moment of saying, "God, you are beautiful, and I am thankful for every moment of my beautiful little life. Thank you." Have a wonderful week, and God bless.